Hi people, and welcome to lesson number 6 on our fiction unit, and today we are going to be working with question 4, which is based on evaluating. So the skills that we cover in today's lesson will build on the previous lessons that I've been posting to the channel. Please go check those out before you try this lesson. You need to sit them in the right order so that we build up your skills ready for this particular lesson. Today your title for question 4 will be evaluating. Now, some of you might be wondering why I've hit LP1 before question 4, and what LP1 stands for Language Paper 1, and that refers to your GCSE paper. So when you get to GCSE, you will sit 2 language papers, and your first language paper will be really similar in format and style to what we're giving you now with the Legal White extract and the questions that follow it. And the question number 4 is based on a question number 4 from that language paper. So what I want you to see from this is that the skills that we're teaching you, they're all designed to prepare you really strongly so that you already have the skills in place when you get to GCSE to know exactly what to do to answer a question on, for example, evaluating. So that said, let's have a look at your objectives for today. So your objective will be to form an opinion and use it to evaluate the extent to which you agree with a statement. Okay, so that's a skill that we are going to develop in this particular tutorial video. And we are going to be evaluating a statement, so something somebody has said about our extra lethal whites. Okay, so you will need to grab your booklet now ready to go, get your pens ready, and here comes your starter. Over there. So, define the word suspense. What do you think that word means? Write down your best guess definition at what the word suspense means. Try and write about a sentence to explain your answer now. Pause the video and then we'll go through the answer. Okay, so according to the Merriam-Webster definition over here, suspense means a state of being suspended or suspension. It can mean mental uncertainty or anxiety, or a pleasant excitement as to a decision or outcome. Okay, it could also mean a state or character of being undecided or doubtful. So that's how the word is defined according to the Merriam-Webster definition. If you didn't get some of these points, add them in green pen to your notes now, and then pause the video and I will meet you back for the challenge. Right guys, so challenge time over here now. What is the difference between suspense and tension? So you can use the image on the board there to maybe give you some ideas as well. You've got that image of the rope being pulled towards. So what do we think the difference might be between that definition that I've given you of suspense and how we could define tension? Is there a difference between the two? What do you reckon it is? See if you can define that word tension for me now, and then below that how it might be different from suspense. Okay, then pause the video, grab your green pen, and we're going to go through the answers. Right guys, so back over at Merriam-Webster, we've got a definition now for tension, and we're going to think about how this indicates a difference between the word tension and that of suspense. There is a subtle difference, and we're going to learn about that now, and then I'm going to tell you why you need to know this information in order to answer question number 4. So, definitions of tension, here we go. Tension 1A, it could be an inner striving unrest or imbalance, often with physiological indication of emotion. In short form, what that basically means is that there is a physical response to tension. So tension is something that you might physically feel and have a reaction to. So whereas suspense might be an emotion of anxiety, but it could also be excitement, and tension normally has a physical reaction to it. For example, that bead of sweat that might form on the back of your neck if you're really stressed out. Perhaps you're about to sit an exam and you know you haven't prepared for it. You might feel that bead of sweat that prepares to drop down the back of your neck. That would be an example of a physical response to tension. Okay. Tension can also be a state of latent hostility or opposition between individuals or groups. So, obviously, tension, you could describe two people as being in a state of tension. That's what that means. And C, a balance maintained in an artistic work between opposing forces or elements. So you can see that tension here, because it's got 4 different varieties of definitions, has a variety of connotations. That word connotation means associations. It can mean the act or action of stretching, or the condition of degree of being stretched to stiffness or tautness, like the image that I showed you of the rope. It can simply mean stress. Both of those are kind of physical descriptions that we're getting again. And number 3, either of 2 balancing forces causing or tending to cause extension. B, the stress resulting from the elongation of an elastic body. And finally, 4, a device or to produce a desired tension, as in a loom. And a loom is something that you would use to weave. So if you were weaving fabric together to create a rug or something, that's what a loom is. And to do that, you need tension, which is by pulling fabric taut. So that word tension has got loads of different connotations and different uses. It can apply to somebody's psychology or inner responses, but it can also apply to physical objects as well. Right then, so if we use that information and what we understand about the definitions of suspense and tension to look back at the challenge, we're now going to think about what the differences between the two are. So the word suspense is normally associated with a moment of high anxiety, for instance, or anticipation of something happening. That's something that might happen. Doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It can also indicate excitement, that you're feeling suspense because you know that it's the night before Christmas and you can't wait to see what you might have got as a present on Christmas Day. A horribly capitalist example, I apologise for that. But you get the idea. Suspense doesn't have to be negative, it can also be positive. Whereas tension usually has more negative connotations, with something breaking or a moment of high stress. So a key difference between them: suspense doesn't have to be negative, tension usually is. And another key difference is that tension usually implies a sense that whatever you are feeling in response is not just an emotional state, but also something you have a physical reaction to. If you look again at that image here of the rope that is being pulled taut, it's very much a physical reaction. When that snaps, you can imagine the physical reaction of that. And tension is the same. We might feel it through sweat, we might feel it through the tensing up of muscles. So tension has a physical response implied in the word that suspense doesn't necessarily have. Okay, so your task now is to jot down those key differences between the word suspense and the word tension using the information I've just given you. Pause the video, go back and recap it if you didn't think you caught it all. Okay, so some of you might be wondering why we would start the lesson looking at suspense and tension if our question is about evaluating something. Evaluating, remember, means deciding to what extent we agree, balancing up the evidence to make a decision about whether we agree with something. Well, the reason we're looking at suspense and tension is because a question for a question for will give you a statement that it will ask you to evaluate. And our statement says, if you look on the right hand side over here, a reader said this part of the extract creates tension and suspense. To what extent do you agree? Now it will all become clear. You will see why Miss was making you look at the words tension and suspense, because those are the words in the key statement that you are going to be asked to evaluate. So your task will be to work out to what extent you agree that tension and suspense have been built up in the extract from Legal White. And when we look at that extract, we're going to be looking at a very specific part of the extract. We're going to look at paragraph 1, and we're going to think about how that builds up tension and suspense. Mostly, you will be agreeing with that, okay? So it's really important that you know that you will largely agree with this, that this part of the extract is creating tension and suspense. But the bit where it gives you room to have your own opinion on this is over here. To what extent do you agree? Now, that question, to what extent, means that you have room to say that you fully, you partly, you mostly agree. It's giving you room to define the degree to which you agree with that statement. So as we have done with the other questions, we are going to now think about how you can use your metacognition skills. That means you're thinking about how you think in order to succeed at answering this question. And so part of metacognition is going through kind of steps in your thinking that will ensure that you answer a question accurately, that will put the groundwork in place to teach you the thinking skills you need to approach questions in the future. So we're going to have a look at the question here, and I've put my top suggestions for your metacognition in the box. So number one is obviously to read the question really carefully. Now, we may think that that sounds so basic, and of course you need to do that, but if you do not read this statement accurately enough, then you cannot ensure that you are answering the question in a thorough and accurate manner. So make sure you have read that question really, really carefully. Your next task in your steps of thinking should be, okay, well, which part of the extract am I being asked to talk about? So the only question that we have encountered so far, and it's the same at GCSE, where you do not get line references, is question 3. So question 3 is the only question that asks you to look at the whole of the extract. All of your other questions will ask you to look or focus at specific parts of the extract. And I have told you that for question number 4, you are going to be looking at paragraph 1 from Legal White. So your job now is going to be to put a box, draw a box or highlight next to the first paragraph from Legal White, for question 4. And then I'm going to ask you to underline the keywords in the statement so that you really think about what the question is asking you to do. Now you can see those keywords because I have highlighted them on the box to the right here. Obviously you need to have focused on the whole of that statement where the reader says. And then the blue highlighting will show you the other keywords that I want you to think about and focus on. So you can copy my highlighting down now. Okay, and the final bullet point, I'm going to kind of skip this bit because you should have basically done that by copying the highlighting, would be to answer the final bullet point here. What's your initial response? And to do that, we're going to need to have a look at that first paragraph in Legal White again, and then I'm going to ask you to answer me on to what extent you would agree that it is building tension and suspense. So we're going to read that again together now. Okay guys, so here we are back with our extract, and we are focusing on this bit, paragraph number 1 up here, and we are going to be rereading that and then thinking about to what degree we would agree that it is building up tension and suspense. So here we go. Panting, his right knee aching, Strike used the handrail to pull himself up the last few steps of the metal staircase leading to his office. 2 raised voices were reverberating through the glass door, one male, the other shrill, frightened and female. When Strike burst into the room, Denise, who was backed against the wall, gasped, "Oh, thank God." Okay, and we pause it there. So that's your extract, and the question is to what extent it's building up that tension and suspense. Have a think about it now. Which parts of the extract do you seem to you to be building up tension and suspense? I almost argue it's quite a deceptive paragraph because the opening with panting, his right knee aching, might sound like it's really tense and like there's loads of action going on, but actually at this point nothing is happening. It almost actually implies that Strike, the detective here, is not very fit. Perhaps he's disabled or been injured in some way. It certainly doesn't have that kind of action element that I would normally expect from something that was full of suspense and tension. But then we start on the next sentence with 2 raised voices reverberating through the glass door, and this image of one being male, the other shrill, frightened and female. That key words shrill and frightened that give this kind of impression that something maybe terrifying or life-threatening might have been happening within the office. Okay. So yeah, I'd say by the time I get to the second sentence, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, we've got a bit of tension and suspense being built up here. And then we've got when struck burst into the room, Denise, who was backed against the wall, gasped, "Oh, thank God." Now, this bit is really using exaggeration or hyperbole, we refer to it as, to exaggerate the emotional state of the characters that are involved. And that certainly seems to be designed to build up tension and suspense. We've got burst, that's an aggressive verb that's being used there to burst something. We've got the fact that Denise is backed against the wall, and that image of her backed against the wall suggests that something terrifying has happened and that she's been threatened. Then we've got the gasp. And oh, thank God, that pleading to some sort of higher deity to come and rescue. And of course, there might be an irony there that, of course, maybe that deity effectively is Strike, our key detective here. Okay, so I think if I was evaluating it, I'd be thinking, yeah, there's a good amount of tension and suspense being built up. Could I separate out into what's tension and what's suspense? I feel that the whole paragraph builds up suspense, but I think that one of the ways it does that is through moments of high tension, and we see that tension in the descriptions of the characters' reactions physically. The bursting through the door, the backed against the wall, the shrill and frightened sound of the voice. Those are all physical descriptions, and those physical descriptions are what tell us that tension is being built up. Okay, so hopefully at this point you feel like, okay, yeah, miss, I get it. I get that, you know, tension and suspense are clearly being developed in that first paragraph, but how do I answer the question? Well, meet me on the next slide and we'll see what we can do to answer that. Right, so your starting point will be to evaluate for yourself what your initial reaction to it was. I've shared with you my reaction to it. You do not have to feel like you have to agree with me. You can have your own opinion on this. You know that I like you to have your own take on it, and normally in class we have lively debates about all of this. But hopefully, even from home, you can come up with your own opinions on the degree to which you agree or disagree with the tension suspense being built up in that first paragraph. Okay, if you dare to disagree, perhaps you can think about on what grounds you disagree. Can you actually argue that there is no tension and suspense? Probably not, but you may be able to argue that it isn't as high impact as it could be. Okay, so you're going to copy out now a rating system onto a piece of paper or into your book. It can look a little bit like this one. So you may draw yourself a thumbs up and a thumbs down. If you're not into your drawing, just copy out the term strongly agree, strongly disagree, and you could have a ranking scale like from 5 agree down to 0 for strongly disagree. And I want you to draw an arrow where you would position yourself on that line. So you're agreeing or disagreeing with this statement that tension and suspense are created in the first paragraph from the extract. Do that now, guys. Pause the video. Okay, so hopefully you've rated yourself now. I'm going to move mine into the position that I think it should go in. So I'm going to put myself probably here. I wouldn't say I completely agree. I largely or mostly agree that tension and suspense are definitely evident in that first paragraph, but I would argue that they are not dialed up to the max. We could see a more tense or more suspenseful scene being created, but I do agree that it is evident. We do see suspense and tension being crafted. Now, what I tell my GCSE classes when we're looking at this question at GCSE level is most of the time the examiners will give you a statement that you wouldn't really disagree with. They are most likely correct in what they say about the text that the question is based upon. But the degree to which you agree is where the magic comes in. So it's about saying, for example, although I don't completely agree, or I don't vehemently, which means strongly, agree, I do largely or mostly agree. However, in this one sentence or in this one image, I don't particularly feel that effective attention and suspense is being built up. Okay, so hopefully you have like an idea of what the question wants from you. We're now going to think about how you select evidence. Don't forget, whenever you write up these answers, we are following that paragraph system that I've been teaching you since the start of the year. So we are following like point, evidence, technique, analysis, and link, petal paragraphs. And I'm going to talk you through now how you'd select appropriate evidence to back up your points. Okay, so I'll see you on the next slide in a second. Okay, so looking at our first paragraph in isolation, like it is here, I'm going to ask you to underline or highlight on your extract 3 phrases which you think definitely build up the tension and suspense. Don't forget that when I talked you through this, I separated my points into where I thought suspense was being built and where I could argue that tension was being built. And I was saying that any descriptions which are physical, which give us like a physical sense of threat or fear, those we could argue are evidence of tension being crafted. I would say that the overall effect of the entire paragraph builds up suspense, but how that happens is through the phrases that build tension. So you're looking for physical descriptions primarily, okay? So go find your 3 top phrases for building tension and suspense. Now I'll pause the video and I'll see you in a moment. Right guys, sorry to sort of shift around on your screen again. I'm now going to show you some examples of phrases that you may have also highlighted, and we're going to look at which of those you think would be creating the greatest amount of tension and suspense and why. So you may have highlighted any of the examples that I put into the blue highlighting on this slide, and I'm going to ask you now to have a real think about why and how those are building up tension and suspense. And I want you to have a go at writing an explanation for that. So, for example, you might write, in my opinion, tension and suspense is clearly built up through the word burst. You put that word burst into your quote marks to indicate that that is a direct quote from the text. And then you would go on to tell me why that is building up tension and suspense, i.e., I feel the word burst is a tense word because it has physical associations with something exploding. And in using that word, the writer indicates that something explosive may be happening in the brim. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the style of an answer that I am looking for. So I'm looking for a point where you say tension and suspense clearly built up in the text. Your evidence, choose any of the comments that I've got highlighted in blue there, whichever you chose in your last ask, and then tell me why it's building up tension and suspense, or how it's building that up. So what we associate those words with and why that would indicate something of tension. Alright guys, get that done now. Okay people, so you've probably now got to a point where you have identified your quotes, you've had a think about why they are building up tension and suspense. We're now going to talk about how you would put that into a well-structured paragraph. So as you can see on this image here, I've written down that term that you now know inside out, petal, and I've made a list of what those letters within petal stand for. So we've got point, evidence, technique, analysis, and link back to what the statement says. Okay, now that is the formula that you will need to use to answer a well-written paragraph. And I'm going to show you now an example of a really well-written paragraph, and we're going to talk through what makes it good or effective. If you weren't sure what petal stood for, can you copy that down from this image here, and then meet me on the next slide ready to have a look at some analysis? Okay, so although I've written at the top here label sentences with petal, I want you to just do that mentally rather than writing it down. It's a lot for you to have to actually write out. So as I read it to you, I want you to think about where I'm making a point, where I'm using evidence, where I'm naming a technique, where I'm analysing the effect, and how I'm linking back to the question and where I'm doing that in the paragraph. So you are looking for thinking about analysing where I'm using petal. Alright, so here we go. I fully agree with the student that the text creates tension and suspense. The man in the room is described in a way which makes the reader feel suspicious of the burning-eyed man. The writer describes his behaviour like a robot. His hand touched nose and chest again. The words touched and nose and chest are repeated to show how the man's movements are like a machine. The writer makes the unnamed man seem frightening by making his behaviour seem unusual. This technique builds suspense and tension because it makes the reader question what is wrong with the man. We wonder what other strange behaviour the man may show. Okay? Now, this is not a full mark answer, I need to tell you that first. It has flaws in it that we are going to talk about shortly. However, it does go through the motions of most of Petal. I want you to see if you can work out what is missing from Petal that would have got it a higher mark. So have a go at doing that now. Right, so here's a rough example of the formula for Petal. And there is one area where it hasn't really developed enough in terms of Petal, and that is the technique. So if you spotted that, really well done. So we do have a clear point. I've said I fully agree with the statement that student creates tension and suspense. Okay, nice clear statement. It answers the question. Evidence. Well, we get that in the following sentence where I make reference to the burning-eyed man using the quote marks to indicate where I've got it from the text. Okay. It's also worth pointing out that this example is not written on the paragraph you're going to write on because I don't want you to just copy what I've done here. The writer describes his behaviour like a robot, his hand touched nose and chest again. Now, what's effective about this is that I'm not just giving one quote, I'm also linking in and embedding a second quote to indicate that I've really paid attention to the extract. I've looked at a variety of phrases that are building up that suspense and tension. Now I go on to say the words touched and nose and chest are repeated. The way that that could have been improved would be to be far more specific about the techniques that the writer is actually using. So don't forget, when you're talking about techniques, you can mention anything in terms of a sentence type. You could also look at your apes, stomps, methods, and again, if you can't remember those, please go back and check out lesson number 2 where I break down for you what those methods are, and you should have them written out into your book to refer back to. Okay, but it can also mean word class and word types. So when I say a word class, I mean, is it like a noun, a verb, or an adjective, or an adverb? Yeah, so I'm asking you to explain what class type of word is being used grammatically. Okay, and in this extract, I'm zooming in, which is good. I'm zooming in on the keywords, touched, nose and chest being repeated. Now, if I'd said that the writer uses repetition of significant words, I think that would have been a more developed and effective analysis where I'm really flagging for an examiner, okay, I get what a technique is, I can use it in my answer, I'm proving that I understand the mechanics of how a writer writes. Okay, so I probably should have said that the writer uses repetition. Other things that I could have said to improve that answer would have been to specify that the writer is using a soft verb with touch. It's not an aggressive movement, it's a soft movement touch. Alongside those body part nouns of nose and chest. Maybe this indicates that although we might be unnerved by the man with the burning eyes in the middle of the rim, maybe he isn't as frightening as we first think, because that verb, as I say, is a more gentle verb, it's not aggressive, and that maybe indicates that the man isn't quite as frightening as first he may appear to be. Okay, and then I would go on to analyse that, and I'd say that they are repeated to show how the man's movements are like a machine. The writer makes this unnamed man seem frightening by making his behaviour seem unusual. This technique builds suspense and tension because it makes the reader question what is wrong with the man. We wonder what other strange behaviour the man may show. Okay, so that's it, guys. That gives you a model of what you're going to be replicating in your write-up the question for. So you will be following the same formula of Petal. See if you can do better than that example with the way that you explain your techniques. Okay? Right, so in order to help you write up your paragraphs now, I am going to give you 2 options. If you are really struggling with that kind of Petal structure and you feel like that's really hard, Try and focus on following PE paragraphs, as we have in class. Okay, so that's where you make a point, you give some evidence by giving a quote, and then you're just analysing it or explaining what you think your quote shows. Okay, for those of you that are aiming for full marks, and to be honest, guys, I know your ability level, I know that you're a capable bunch. I'd like you to try and aim for a petal if you can, and that's using the system that I taught you a moment ago in the video. Again, if you need to go back and have a look at that and use that as a model to write your own example, please do that. So what I'm going to get you to do is choose a quote to base your writing on, and this time the quotes that I'm giving you are from a variety of points in the extract, and this is going to be a practice answer, not a full answer. So quotes 1 and 2 here are from the bit of the extract that I have specified I want you to have a go at writing your answer up for. The final one is there as a test for anyone who would like more of a stretch in their work, but that quote doesn't come from the first paragraph. So when you come to write yours up, you cannot use that quote, okay? So these are differentiated by the difficulty level and explaining them. If you want a relatively easy level of difficulty, go for the first quote. Second one is middling, and the third one is the harder quote to try and analyse. And your question, again, to help you refer back to, is down here. The writer brings the struggles of the protagonist to life for the reader. It's almost as if you were there. That's an example of how the question would be formulated. We, of course, know that our question is, and I'm going to skip back to that. There you go, here's your question in your booklet as well. This part of the extract creates tension and suspense. To what extent do you agree? So that's the question you're going to be answering for. Okay, so focus on the question and choosing your appropriate level of difficulty weight. Your task now will be to have a practice go at writing out a petal paragraph. So reminders of what the petal paragraph are down here, and the kind of methods that you might refer to in your quotes are along the side here. So any of these that you can spot in your quotes. And to break that down for any of you who are really stuck and you want to follow a petal paragraph structure, let's read through the quotes now and identify some techniques. So quote number 1, over here. Denise, who was backed against the wall, gasped, "Oh, thank God." Okay, so that word gasp, what kind of word class is it? We've got a verb being used, so you could talk about the use of powerful verbs, tense verbs. You could also use your analysis of that with the word backed against as well to talk about her movement as she moves back against the wall. And you could look at her expletive or her exclamatory phrase, "Oh, thank God." If you are exclaiming, you are shouting something out, and she is using an exclamation, and we know that because she's using an exclamation mark at the end there. So you could also talk about it as what we call an exclamatory phrase. Okay. Second quote, 2 raised voices were reverberating through the glass door. Again, really interesting use of verbs in this. So we've got the adjective there of the raised voices, and the fact that they are reverberating, that they're shaking through the glass door. Okay. You could also, perhaps for that one, talk about how that builds up a sense of anxiety about the events that are to come in your analysis. So think about how you could explain the effect of that. You may, it's a bit of a stretch, but you may have spotted that kind of pattern of R with raised voices for reverberating. I think you'd be right to notice it. I don't think it's a pure alliteration, but you could talk about the fact that repetition of, or the power of joining those words, raised and reverberating, gives us a really clear impression of the anger that these two people inside the room seem to be experiencing. Okay, and your final quote, nose, chest, hand at his side, nose, chest, hand at his side. The mechanical movement was distressing to watch. An obvious technique there is your use of repetition. Okay, but you should also be thinking about sentence structure for that. The use of that kind of breaking up and fragmenting of the sentence into nose, chest, hand at its side, nose, chest, hand at its side. The use of the comma to fragment that sentence is being done really deliberately because it kind of creates like a clockwork element to the sentence, almost mimicking the mechanical movement that the man is going through. Okay, so I've given you a couple of things that you could comment on for those particular quotes. And your job now, guys, is going to be to try and write up a practice battle paragraph on whichever quote you feel you would wish to work with. Don't forget, if you've opted for the hardest one, number 3, you cannot use that in your final answer. Because I want you to specifically write me up a paragraph which is based on the first paragraph in the extract. Alright, so have a go now, pause the video and I'll see you in a moment. Okay guys, so having had a go at writing your paragraph, we are going to now grab green pens and get ready to add in some extra vocabulary that would prove that you were answering the question in a really focused manner and would demonstrate that you have like the ability to use words accurately to prove that you are evaluating something. Okay, so the best arguments say to what extent they agree, and we use what are called qualifiers to do this, and I've listed for you some of the top qualifiers over on the right here. So we have partially, largely, mostly, fully, completely, strongly, and vehemently. Vehemently is a posh word for strongly. It's an even more exaggerated version of strongly. It means like very close to completely, really passionately agree with something. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to copy that list down into your books now. You're going to need this because you'll need to refer back to it throughout your time in English. Right, and once you have copied those key qualifiers down, your next task is going to be to choose one that you could embed in the paragraph that you wrote for the last task. So I want you to decide which of those words, which qualifier, you think would make your argument sound most accurate. So I'm asking you to pick a word. Partially would be like probably the most controversial, like least agree with. And the strongest agreement words would be completely and vehemently and strongly up at the top end over here. So choose a word to embed into your answer now. Okay, so some of you will be thinking, well, thanks, miss, I get that, but I've got no idea where to put it into my answer. My top tip would be it should go in your point and in your link part of your battle paragraph. So your qualifier would, for instance, say, I partially agree with the student statement that the reader experiences tension and suspense in that part of the extract. Or you might say at the end of your paragraph, in this way, through the words that I have analysed, I think it is clear that I largely agree with what the student has said, that tension and suspense are fundamentally being demonstrated in that paragraph. Okay, so you can borrow any of my phrases, use my wording, but you want to add in some of those qualifiers to your point and your link part of your petal paragraph now. Going with your final writing up of question 4 from my squirrel on a fence over here. Don't sit on a fence is the message that I want you to kind of remember from looking at this image. What do I mean by that? I mean, don't say that I partly agree because, but then I also disagree because in your answer. You want to have a really clear line of argument. So like I say, you will likely and probably should agree with the statement and that the writer is definitely building up tension and suspense for the reader in the first paragraph. But you want to spot only small elements that you disagree with. Don't say that these are my reasons for agreeing, then these are my reasons for disagreeing. I'm saying argue a clear line of argument. Although I mostly agree, this is the only part where I would say I disagree. So your line of argument is heavily weighted towards one side, which will probably be agree. Do not sit on the fence and give an equally weighted argument. Although that's a really useful skill to have, especially in some of your subject areas, like in history or in RE, and then you might come to a conclusion in your final part of your response. Here I want you to choose a line of argument that is dominant. So one side of the argument that you are mostly hammering and proving, and you only use elements of conjecture to disapprove with that if they're really small. So I might say that there's one word or phrase that I don't think completely upholds the tension and suspense, but mostly I'm agreeing with what the student has said. Okay? Right, so now it is time to have a go at actually writing up your answer. So question number 4. You are going to have roughly 20 minutes that I'd like you to use to try and write up this answer. And I've given you some sentence starters here that you can use to help you answer that. All right? So you may, for example, start with I agree strongly, or I mostly agree, I completely agree, or I partially agree with the statement that. And you want to use those keywords suspense and tension immediately, so that the writer builds up tension and suspense for the reader in that first paragraph. Then you want to go on to argue how and why they do that. So it is clear that something bad is going to happen when the writer tells us that. Give a quote, perhaps about her shrill or frightened voice. And then you're going to go on to say the use of a technique of, perhaps a significant verb that tells us that this is a physical reaction to tension, would be a good way to go about answering that. And this makes the reader think, feel, or imagine. I would say it makes the reader feel apprehensive that something is going to happen that may be damaging or may be frightening. Okay, so these are some sentence starters that you can use, and you're going to want to follow the same petal pattern that we looked at earlier in the lesson. So you're going to make your clear point, find some evidence, find the technique, analyse the effect in terms of suspense and tension, and then link back by explaining to what extent that means that you agree or disagree with the statement. Okay? So you may find it helpful to look back at this point at the model petal paragraph here. And I want you to use this to guide what you're writing. You're taking your quotes from the first paragraph, and I'd like you to aim to write me one really good paragraph in answer for this. For those of you that need to be pushed and know that you need a bit more of a challenge, please don't be complacent. If you're finding this easy, you need to listen when I'm saying that I'm offering you a challenge activity, and take me up on it and have a go at one of the challenges. So the challenge I would give to you now is to aim to write 3 paragraphs if you can, all following the same petal structure, all explaining the degree to which you agree or disagree with the statement that tension and suspense is clearly being created. Okay? So that's your C challenge if you're up for it. The rest of you, I'd like one really solid paragraph in answer, and you can use this one as an example. Okay, so pause the video, complete that now. Okay, so now we are going to have a look at the Marc scheme, and we are going to think through how you could mark yourself according to the criteria here. So again, you've got your 4 levels, and we're going to talk through what a full mark answer would look like, and then you're going to have a go at marking yours in comparison. So I've really set you the challenge to have made sure that you've written one really good paragraph. If you've done the challenge, maybe you've got 3. Certainly if you've got 3, you're looking to be aiming for that level 4. Your paragraph must have the following things in it to qualify for a level 4 answer. You must have used evidence in every paragraph that you've written, so you've got to have quoted. You should aim to say more than one thing about the quote. You should also be making sure that in that paragraph you are linking back to those key words that were in the statement. So you must be using the words suspense and tension. Now, a common kind of complaint that I get from my year 11s is, but miss, I feel like I'm being overly repetitive. I just keep using those words, and I'm sure that that's making my writing less effective. And my answer is always no, because what you're doing is you're proving to me as an examiner that you are answering the question. You are proving to me that you know what you're doing, that you're focused on the task. And I don't see a problem with using those words repetitively, because you're signposting to the examiner that you're really focused on answering the question accurately. So don't worry about overusing the word suspense and tension. Okay. Make sure you've got your quotes in each paragraph. Another quality for a level 4 answer would be that you're being, as it says here, critical and convincing. Now, what do those words mean? Basically, it means that you've made a really solid argument that is really clear from the way that you've written, that you have a side of the fence that you are arguing. You are not like the squirrel on the previous slide who is sat on a fence. You are making it clear what position you are taking, whether you completely agree, whether you completely disagree, and you are supporting that with evidence consistently. Okay? So, same thing that we've done on previous examples for questions. You're going to grab your green pen. I want you to have a go at grading where you think you fall on that. Would you say overall you're fairly detailed in your analysis, you're perceptive and you're evaluating? Do you think maybe you're not quite perceptive enough? That means you're not seeing things in it and saying more than 2 things about your quote, in which case maybe you're clear and relevant in your evaluation. If you're not always using evidence reliably, you're more likely to be demonstrating some evaluation. And if you are barely quoting and you're not really developing a link back to the keywords in question on suspense and tension, you're probably down here in simple and limited evaluation. Okay, and to demonstrate that you are evaluating, that yours is clear and relevant for a level 3, I'd be expecting to see those qualifiers like I strongly agree, I partially agree, I partially disagree, etc. Okay, so have get grading yourself now, and then I want you to give yourself a what went well and an even better if. If you can come up with 2 for both of those, that would help you out massively, because it's forcing you to think a little bit more about how you could improve. Some of the things that you could be saying are that you've done really well in using your qualifiers, your words like strongly, partially, etc. Something else you might add as a what went well is your use of evidence, that you're backing up your points and that you're attempting to be convincing and critical in the way that you do that. Another point for your what went well might be that you feel like you really accurately zoomed in on your quote and you explained the techniques and methods that you feel that the writer is using. So those would be the kind of points you can make for that. For your even better if, your areas to improve, you may have that you need to use quotes to back up all of your points, that you could say 2 things about your quotes instead of just 1, maybe that you need to specify techniques in more detail, and if that is the case, please go and revisit lesson number 2 again and look at the language analysis skills that I go through in that lesson and the common techniques or ape stomp that writers will often use. Okay, so that should give you a rough idea of what you should be doing for question 4. Hopefully you feel like you've learned something about how to evaluate and the words that you can use to do so effectively. Again, thank you guys for bearing with this and sitting your way through the video, and for doing your best with the work that I'm setting here. Get in touch over Show My Homework, drop me some messages so I know how you're getting on. As usual, sending you all my absolute best wishes. Okay, take care, guys.